Um, I'm out by Colby, Kansas. I've been a farm manager out there since 2016. I took over our farm out there. We've got 3,000 acres of dry land, farm ground out there. We're no-till 100% now. We were a full tillage when I took over. We also use cover crops and then biology on all of our ground through worm casting extract, plus some other amendments since 2023, which, like Scott said, that helps you cut out your other fertilizers. So on a farm scale, we haven't used phosphorus on our farm for 3 years. Last year we were nitrogen free, 98% nitrogen free on our farm, which right now has been a pretty big savings. But starting that on 2023 on my farm, I went, hey, I need to share this with everybody else. So my best friend since 8th grade and I started a business, Northwest Kansas Soil Amendments. And so in 23, 24, and 25, and for most of this year, we're going to be bringing in compost from outside as we're building up our own composters. But last year we produced 45,000 gallons of worm extract to sell to farmers to help reduce nitrogen use and phosphorus use on farms. So why scale up your composting on your garden, your house? You need more organic matter in your garden, because the more organic matter you have, the more water you're going to hold, the more natural nutrients you're going to be able to get out of the ground, less you're going to have to spend on inputs. You're going to have your own biology, which is going to help support your own plant health. You're not going to have to spray pesticides as often. You're not going to have to treat for powdery mildew, those type of things. The healthier your plant is, the healthier your food is, the healthier you are. And then you just have more compost, which is great. So this is only cut off a little bit here. But so you got two kinds of composting at scale. You have aerobic composting that is with oxygen, and you have anaerobic composting, which is without oxygen. I'm mostly going to cover the different ways you can compost with oxygen today. It's a little bit easier. It's also faster. So it takes generally about, at the outside range, 6 months to complete. There's one or two that'll take a year, but a lot of them is under that time frame. Generally, they're uncovered, so you can keep an eye on them. They're a little bit more physical effort throughout the whole process than covered composting, and it takes a little more management, but they're the more straightforward methods of composting. With anaerobic, it takes 6 months to a year. Basically, you build a pile, you inoculate it with anaerobic biology, you cover it, and you don't touch it for a year and just let it do its thing. And that is about the sum total of what I know about anaerobic composting. So aerobic is what I have focused on. I've stole these slides from Dr. Elaine Ingham. She has the Soil Food Web course online. You can get lots of great information that applies to all kinds of aerobic composting. Hers is, she has her own specific hot pile that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But this is the general ratios you need to use to have a good compost. So you're going to want 10 to 20% high nitrogen source, which we'll cover these each in more detail here in a second. But and then 20 to 30% of greens, and then 60% browns. And you're going to mix those all together. She has a great example right here. If you don't want to do the math multiple times every time you're building your compost pile, get a certain set of buckets that's easily divisible by 10. So you start with 10 buckets, and you've got 1 bucket that's high nitrogen, 3 buckets that are green, and 6 buckets that are browns. And then you wet each of those and you add them to your pile, and then you fill those again, and it keeps the math simple all the way through. The only one I would say maybe caution a little bit is if your high nitrogen source is manure. A whole 5-gallon bucket of manure is going to be much more than 10%. I know from experience. I did that, and I'm like, man, this pile sure looks like it's a lot of nitrogen, but I'm doing it by the buckets. And anyway, it got really, really hot and stinky, and then I had to start over, which I've done a lot. It is okay to mess up, and I have to believe that because I mess up a lot. But so that makes your pile. You add water to it, you stack it up, and then what you're shooting for is 145 to 160 degrees for about 3 days. And then you're going to turn your pile, and then it's going to heat up to that same spot again. And generally most piles, most methods, you're doing that 3 times. And that's so every part of your pile has been at the center and has hit that sweet spot for temperature. Because this promotes anaerobic, healthy microbiology growth. And with that temperature, we kill weed seeds and we kill bad pathogens. And so that makes a safe pile for us to use. So that's the same thing, like 131 degrees and above for 3 days, turn your pile. If you get it to 150, which is really getting pretty close to too hot, you only need 2 days. If you hit 165, you only need 1 day, but you're also starting to grow some dangerous biology in there at that high level. You're also at that high temperature, you're losing a lot of water, you're losing a lot of nitrogen, a lot of the good stuff you want to keep in your pile. And I can't stress, a good probe that's long enough to hit the center of your pile is really key. You can find little short ones. You can get some that are 8 foot long. It's just whatever it takes to get to the center of your pile so you can monitor it and record it and make sure that you're doing things well. I like a digital probe because I've had an analog gauge like this, and I was doing it inside a building where I had lots of humidity in the building, and the stupid gauge kept fogging over, and that was just annoying. So I like a digital one. We have a round top that we can compost in year round. We spray foamed it, and we have an old house heater in there. And when we're going full tilt and we've got it full of our worm bins, it gets to be about 90% humidity in there, and we can make it rain when we hit the building. So yeah, those type of things cause me problems sometimes. But moisture content, but also this is my business partner. This was when we were making Johnson Sioux compost, and we were mixing it up in a old feed mixer, and we're like, hey, how are we going to get water up there? He's like, oh, I'll just sit on the side while we have the mixer on. I'm like, okay, don't tell your wife. But your goal for moisture content's about 60-70%, and that's a really vague number. Like, what does that mean? But what you're going to do, you can buy moisture probes online. They're a waste of your money. They're inaccurate, or they're really expensive, and you can just do it with your hand. So you're going to grab your compost, put it in the palm of your hand, and not a great giant softball size. You want a little like plum, walnut sized piece that you can actually squeeze. And you're going to squeeze in your hand, and if it runs water out in a stream, it's too wet. That's 73% and above. If you squeeze it and you get 1 or 2 drops out, that's about perfect. You're right here, 1 or 2 drops, that's 63 to 68% moisture. And then when you open your hand, it should still be glistening, like wet glistening. That's kind of the sweet spot. If it's only tacky, it's not glistening, you're only about 52%. Anything less than that's 42%, it's way too dry. You're not going to have enough moisture for your microbes, because all the microbes that we are cultivating in these piles are aquatic. Doesn't seem like that's the case, but when you actually look at them on a microscopic scale, they're aquatic. They swim around in the liquid. And to give you a scale for that, I just spent some time with a new microscope last week. All of these microbes can live between a slide and a slip cover. So just microns thick, and they have enough room to turn over and do flips in there and watch them zoom around, and you're thinking, oh man, I'm putting this slip cover on there, I'm going to smash them all out and I'm going to kill them. And they're just happy as can be in there. So the scale is just, it blows my mind. So here's our feed stocks. Like I said, so these are a little bit hard to see, but so good examples of greens that you want 20 to 30% of: grass clippings, fresh hay, or food scraps. With grass clippings and fresh hay, you do not want something that's been treated with insecticide or fungicide. It will kill your microbes. Same thing with the hay. If you can get it with less herbicide on it, the better. And if you're not sure if it's had it or not on it, just open your bales up, let them sit for like 3 months, and that will off-gas some of that. It exposes it to sunlight, and it'll break it down. Browns, you guys can probably get wood chips here. You want hardwood wood chips. So you want oak, cottonwood, any of those really woody type of trees would be great options. Do not use pine, cedar, or like Rocky Mountain juniper. All of those in the sap, they have a compound in there that is naturally antimicrobial. and your pile will not heat up. Now, you can use those if you're willing to let them set for like a year or two. And that's just enough time for all that sap to dry out and off gas into the atmosphere, and then you can use it. And if you can't get a hold of wood chips that fits that criteria, you can use wheat straw, you can use corn stubble, milo stubble. I also use hemp hurd that I can get in by the bale. It looks like a giant tire when you get it in. It's kind of a, or like a silage bale. That's what it looks like. But it's the woody part of the hemp plant that they can't process during that. So when they're getting just, hemp out of it. And then high nitrogen sources, easy one is manure. You can use any manure, chicken manure, pig manure, cattle manure. Try to make sure your manure does not have dewormers in it. Because, you're going to add worms to these, and that's going to kill them. I know from experience. Alfalfa hay is the easiest one. You can get it from a Tractor Supply. That's fine. You can go get it fresh bales. If you don't want to handle poop, there's your source. Here's like same pile we were mixing up. This is too wet. I did not realize it at the time, but I was grabbing great big clumps of the compost and squeezing them. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not getting any water out of that. What I should have been doing was squeezing a much smaller ball, and it would have been rolling out of there. We still made some decent compost with this. It just wasn't as good as it could have been, and that frustrates me because I'm a perfectionist. So here, this kind of sort of showing up. You can get compost calculators online, and they will kind of help you figure out what the overall carbon to nitrogen ratio for your compost is. So you can see here, I mix this up with straw, grass clippings, manure, and I use sawdust because it was an equivalent C to N ratio for the hemp hurd I was using. And it'll tell me, hey, your overall C to N ratio roughly is 31 to 1. And your moisture content, if you add 250 gallons of water, is about 51%. That is not accurate. I had really wet compost when I added that much water to it. But, the bulk density is about right. They're just, if you need reassurances that, hey, does this mix of materials that I'm going to use roughly work? They're a good tool. They're good for helping you get going. And you can find all sorts of them online. So I guess I'm going to stop there for a second. Does anybody have questions up to that point? Because I'm going to switch over to different styles of composting. But that's kind of the basics, how we're going to build our piles, what you need to know to make a good pile. If anybody has any questions about that stuff. Yeah, Dennis?
Going back to your ratios.
Yeah.
Your food stuff, 20% green, 60% brown. And was that 20% high nitrogen?
It is 10% high nitrogen, 60% browns, 20 to 30% greens. Yep. Mm-hmm. So, and if you guys have any questions going through here, please stop me. I can stop and talk about anything. So the first kind of most straightforward way you can scale up your composting is with a windrow. This obviously is a giant example of it, where they're using or a medium-sized example of it, where they're using a compost turner here to flip their pile. You can do this with a pitchfork. You do not have to have a tractor. It is easier, but kind of the rule of thumbs here is your pile needs to be, twice as wide as it is tall. So if it's 4 foot tall, it needs to be 8 foot wide. It needs to resemble a Quonset or a round top building, kind of a nice dome shape to it. And you're going to build this pile like a lasagna. You're going to lay down your browns and you're going to wet them. You're going to lay down your greens and you're going to wet them. And your high nitrogen, and you're just going to build that up. You don't need to mix it, because after it heats up and it hits that first stage of heating, 145 degrees for 3 days, you're going to flip this whole pile either on itself or over into another windrow. So that's going to mix your pile up. You're going to do that 3 times at a bare minimum, so that every part of that windrow has seen the center of the pile. You can make a lot of good compost, medium grade compost, for doing like no-till gardening that way. If you want to grow in the ground and just lay like a 2 foot wide bed, however long you want, and plant directly into that, this is a good source to make a lot of quality compost that way. Obviously, it's easier if you've got like a loader bucket. Then you can just come up, scoop it, and dump it over in the loader bucket. It'll kind of turn itself. But obviously, you can do this at a smaller scale with a pitchfork. The Elaine Ingham hot pile is the other turned pile I'm going to talk about. There is all kinds of information online about how to do this, and it makes some of the best high density microbial compost you can make. The quick and dirty explanation on it is you get a piece of hog panel, you set it on its side, and you make a big circle. And I think you put a pallet underneath it, but I don't think you have to. Anyway, you're going to put you're going to make that same lasagna, and you're wetting it as you go, and you're going to let it heat up for 3 days at temperature, and then you're going to take the hog panel off, and it's going to hold its shape because all that microbiology is going to exude a glue called glomalin, and that's going to hold its shape. So you're going to take the hog panel, move it over to a new spot, hook it back together, and you're going to flip this whole pile into another pile inside the hog panel, and that's turning it. And so once you do that 3 times, it's all been heated, it's all highly microbial, and basically that's finished compost. But it is a lot of work because you don't think, oh, I can move this pile pretty quick, but it's wet, it's heavy, and it's dense. You won't need to work out that day. But if you want a lot of information on how to do it, everybody has YouTube videos of it. She has a whole course on how to do it. It's a really great compost by the time you're done if you follow her instructions online. This is what I started with. It's a Johnson Sioux static pile because I was going to use it on farm ground. The whole reason you would choose this one is it is super fungal dominant. And all of our farm ground through years of herbicides and fertilizers and tillage has killed off all the fungal communities in our ground. And so I wanted to add something back that was full of fungal components. So that's why I started with this. It does take a full year to get all the way done. It's going to start fairly similar to the Elaine Ingham pile. You're going to start with a pallet, and then you're going to drill 6 4-inch holes in the bottom, equally spaced. You're then going to set a cage on top of it or an IBC tote. I have a lot of IBC totes, so I use that for my cage. You can use chicken wire, you can use hog panel, but if you're doing it that way, they want 6 foot tall. I didn't want to start with that big, so I used an IBC tote. But the more you start with, the more you're going to end up with. Because if you start with a small amount, it's still going to break down about the same, and you're going to have, when you're all finished, it'll be compost from about that ring down. So it'll decrease in size by about 2/3. Anyway, it's the same ratio as everything else, but those holes we drilled in there, you're going to stick 4-inch PVC pipe in, and it's going to go all the way to the top of your pile. You do not need to drill holes in the PVC pipe because we're going to take them out. But you're going to stick those pipes in there, you're going to fill it with compost, and you're going to try to keep those pipes straight. So maybe building a jig on top is a good answer. I had these braces that came with the IBC tote, and so I just used baling twine and hooked them to that because I'm a farmer. But after about 3 days, all the microbes that have started growing in there and the pile started to heat up a little bit are going to kick out enough of that glue that it's going to hold the pile together. And you're going to grab those pipes and you're just going to pull them out. And you're going to want to wear gloves because those pipes are going to be hot. They're going to be 145 degrees on the outside. But then that's it. You just have to water it for the next year. Well, almost all of it. Anyway, once it gets done heating, which you're going to want to make sure it gets to 145 degrees all the way through that pile for 3 days, and then it's going to start cooling off. Elaine Ingham would turn it and keep going. We're going to leave it stationary so that it grows fungal hyphae and all kinds of different fungal biology, which they do not like to be disturbed. They have really fine, delicate hyphae, and that's how they reproduce and grow. But once it goes below 90 degrees, you dump in red wigglers. And then they go through and they turn the pile. and they move it all around. But the reason we have these holes, you can kind of see it, like there's one there, there, and I think one in the middle. But no one part of your pile is farther than 12 inches from air, because that's how far at 1 atmospheric pressure oxygen will penetrate into your pile. So that's why it's still considered aerobic composting. Even though you're not turning it, it's a passively aerated system. It makes really great compost. I don't think you should probably start there, because you have to wait a full year to know whether or not you did it right. And it's pretty labor intensive up front. You have to have space for it. You can let it freeze. But instead of taking a year, it's now going to take a year and a half, because for however long it's frozen, it's not composting. It's going to have to heat back up, start over. If your pile is not big enough, your worms will freeze and die. I know, because this one right here froze and died on me. It dropped down to where it was about right here. After 8 months, we hit winter. We had one of those polar vortexes. I went out there and hit it with a shovel, and my shovel rebounded off my pile. And I went, well, crap, that was a lot of work down the drain. But it does make really good compost. And there's Dr. Johnson has a video online. He makes the whole thing, does a really great job of explaining wetting it down. And you cannot let it dry out, because you can't possibly re-wet these piles without over soaking one area. And if it gets too wet, all that water is going to force the air out of that area, and it's going to go anaerobic, and it's going to stink. This one in particular, this bullet point right here says low odor. If this ever has a smell to it, you've done it wrong. So it will go through this whole process, and at most it will smell like wet soil. So this is kind of what we have switched to after that. Well, 50% of our equation. This also makes a lot of good medium quality compost for your home or garden, and it does it really quick. So aerated static pile. So you can either have above ground aeration or below ground aeration. Where I started was above ground. I started inside a building, which created its own problems. But you can see we've got PVC pipe here. You can drill about 3/8 inch size holes in that PVC pipe about every 12 inches. And you're going to hook it to a bouncy house blower. About a 1-horse bouncy house blower on a timer. It's going to come on for about 5 minutes, go off for 5 to 10, come on for 5. And you're going to make your pile in a big mound on top of that. And so you can make these pipes as long as you want, as long as you have enough air on the back end. If you're making it in a windrow with pipes underneath it, same thing. Twice as wide as it is high, or you can just put them inside bins. This is what I was doing for proof of concept. I put some T-posts in the ground and threw pallets over the top of them, and then built my pile inside that with this underneath here. One way I screwed this up is I did it inside this building that is perfectly sealed with spray and insulation and no ventilation whatsoever. I thought, this is great. It's not going to freeze. We started that about a week before Thanksgiving, my partner and I did, and it was going great. I was monitoring. It was giving off a little ammonia spell, but I'm like, it's not a big deal. We're doing great. And I wet it down real good before I left for Thanksgiving, and I told my business partner, I'm like, hey, go check on that once while I'm gone for 3 days. And he's like, oh, yeah, I can do that. So he gets over to the building. He's like, hey, man, he calls me. I can't get in the building. I'm like, did you forget how to open a door? And he's like, no, I know how to open a door. I can't breathe in there. The whole building was full of ammonia that had off-gassed because I put way too much manure in this pile, and there was no ventilation. I could have overcome the too much manure had it been outside. So we aired out the building. We have, you can see over here, this was our Johnson Sioux pile. We had 5,000 pounds of Johnson Sioux over there, and we killed all the worms that were in it. We basically created a giant gas chamber. We also didn't have rodent problems at that point. But anyway, so we moved it outside, and we did it in the middle of December, and it was great. I mean, it was below freezing. We'd have steam rising off of it. It looked really cool. And so then we upgraded from that. But this makes really good feedstock also if you're going to have large scale worms. Because it's not going to heat up when you feed it to the worms. It's already composted. You don't have to worry about weed seeds. You don't have to worry about pathogens. And then you let the worms do what they do, and they take medium grade compost and they make it top notch. There's a YouTube channel, No Till Growers. Their host used to be Jesse Frost, Farmer Jesse. He talks about this style of composting for his no-till gardening methods. And that's like, he does that garden bed like we were talking. You just lay down a strip, it holds the weeds back because it's like 8 inches thick. But you cannot go out and buy compost to do that process with. It's way too expensive. So you've got to find an easy way to make it at home. Probably the most expensive part of doing this, if you make it with pallets and stuff, is going to be this PVC pipe. And the PVC pipe is not going to last. You're maybe going to get through this process twice, and then it's going to be brittle because it's going to get to 145 degrees on the bottom of that pile, and it's going to break down your PVC pipe. Another way to battle that is you can bury it, and you can put it in the ground, and then you don't have to worry about that. If you're doing it above ground like this, I also recommend you use something for a baffle like straw, hemp hurd, wood chips, something to just, so that when you're scooping that compost off the top, you're not hitting your pipes down here. And if you do something more than duct tape them together, which is what I did here, you can actually attach a chain to the end and just pull them out. I didn't think that was going to be that big a deal, and then we couldn't get the pipes out, and that was a whole mess. But this process, when you're doing it like this, you're going to build this, let it sit for about a week, and then you're going to roll it. So you can turn it on there. You can turn it into another bin. That's generally what people who do an aerated pile do. But you turn it about at least once, so everything's been exposed to the center. And then you've got medium grade compost and then let it cool off at the end. You're probably looking at about 3 weeks, and you've completely composted this, where it's safe to use. It's not going to be great, but it's going to have some biology in it. It's going to be safe to use on your garden, and it's going to be cheap, especially if you do it multiple times to offset the building process. I did it once and decided I loved it, so I built this. And convinced my mom to put it on her farm. So each one of these bays, this is what we use now. This bay will hold 13 cubic yards of compost. We have below grade aeration. These are 1/2 inch holes drilled every 12 inches. Here, here, and here. We have the same bouncy house motor. It's sitting on the back side over here, and we have a manifold that goes all along the back, and we have slide gates so we can turn on and off each one of these bays, or each individual run. And so we've eliminated the PVC pipe under here. It is just all concrete underneath here. This is a really expensive way to do it, but we're doing it at scale, so that helps some. But we are getting separated solids dairy manure from a non-GMO dairy out in western Kansas, and we bring it here. We compost it for about 3 to 4 weeks, and then we feed it to our worms. And obviously we're not to the point where we will use all of this as worm food yet, so we will windrow some of it and continue to inoculate it with our compost extract. And then we're going to sell that, probably end up selling it back to my own farm to be spread out on the ground just to continually increase organic matter. Because 1% increase in organic matter in your soil can hold something like 10,000 extra gallons of water. And in western Kansas, that's a pretty big game changer. This is a smaller version. You can find all kinds of designs online, but basically what you're going to do here, they've got the below grade aeration in there. One of these panels is going to come off, and so you're going to fill this one. You're going to stockpile your materials. You're then going to fill this and wet it and turn the air on. It's going to sit here for a week. You're going to move it from the second slot here to the first one, and then it's going to sit in here for a week, and you're going to refill this one. And then when this one's set for a week, you move it over here, and you refill this one, and this sits here for a week. And so by the third time so then you're going to fill this one. But the fourth time you go to fill this one is done, and you empty it. And then, it just keeps hopscotching back and forth there, or leapfrogging. But you can find all kinds of designs. It's scalable to fit whatever you have for manure needs or waste needs on your farm. I really like that setup because bouncy house motors are pretty cheap, and that's really about all you need to power these things. And then these are our worm bins. So they're 4 foot wide by 8 foot long by 30 inches deep. And then you've got a winch on this side and a winch over here. I put shade cloth on there because I thought I needed it. I don't. But these are great for harvest efficiency. They're breathable. All the worms stay at the top, like our previous presenter was saying, so you can harvest off the bottom. There are 2 things that make this thing work flawlessly. One is bulk density. That is the right amount for this, which is about 25 pounds per cubic foot, which is about, if you weigh a 5-gallon bucket and it weighs 25 pounds, that's perfect. Because up here at the top, that's going to seem really fluffy, and the worms are going to love it. But by the time it gets to the bottom, it's going to be pretty compacted. I killed a whole worm bed doing this. I put in feedstock that was way too dense. It was something like 50 to 60 pounds per cubic foot. So they couldn't even move through it. So you start by putting about 10 inches of compost or cocoa coir on the bottom. Well, you put paper down because it's open on the bottom. It's like it looks kind of like hog panel on the bottom. And so you lay paper down, you put compost on it, you add your worms, and you fill it up. And when it's about halfway full, you start harvesting off the bottom and continually adding about every 2. You harvest every 2 weeks, and you're adding every week until it's completely full, and then you just harvest every week. But there's a little blade that runs across the bottom, and it knocks the bottom 2 inches off every week, and you're feeding on the top every week. But by the time I got to the top, I wasn't finding like thousands of worms like I should have been, because I should just be brushing the top back and it should just be full of worms. I'd find like 1 or 2 or 3. And at this point, my business partner and I had been through like 3 different iterations of composting. I'm like, man, we need help. We're trying to run a business. So we hired a consultant out of California who'd been doing this style of composting for about 25 years or so, and kind of started asking her some questions. I'm like, I'm only finding 1 or 2 worms. And she's like, okay, you probably did it wrong. That's okay. Why don't you dig down and see if you find any worms? So I dug this whole thing out by hand and found no worms. So having the right bulk density is great. Also, moisture management, because if you over wet it, the moisture is going to run down through, and those worms are going to chase the moisture, and they're going to be at the bottom. So when you harvest, you're going to have a bunch of worms fall out, and you're going to have to sift them and put them back, and you apparently can never fix that. So this is a really big industrial one. Hiawassee makes a small one. You can find one. Steve Churchill runs Urban Worm Company on the internet. He makes the Urban Worm Bag. It's, I don't know, it's about the size of a tote wide, and then it's like 2 foot deep, and it's just got a drawstring on the bottom, and you open that up once a month and use your hand and knock some off the bottom, close it back up, and you're always feeding on the top. Works pretty well. I have one. I put it in a room that got too cold, and I killed those worms. I'm really great at killing worms. If you want to know how to kill them, I'm your guy. I get creative. But there's kind of what it looks like inside. So here's where we're adding our first bit of compost. There's the brown paper underneath it. That's kind of the side view. That's where we were building it, and we hadn't put the side back on there yet. But now we're up to 4 of these all at one time. So we're making 640 pounds of worm castings a week. We then turn that into extract. We have a big commercial extractor. It makes about 5 to 7 gallons per 1 pound of worm castings. We then apply that to ground at 5 gallons the acre. But if you have worm castings like we were just talking about in the last session, and you have about a pound of those, he said 1 pound to 1 gallon of water. I'd probably put a pound in a big tea bag, which you can get off Amazon, that's reusable. Put it in that, put it in a 5 gallon bucket with full water, drop a bubbler in there for like an aquarium. Let it bubble for a couple hours. That's going to knock the microbiology out of that compost. Your bag should be about 200 mesh or so. That's big enough holes that all the microbiology can go out through that and then leaves the compost inside. So you get a little bit of carbon, you get a lot of biology. You then take the tea bag out. After 2 hours, you have extract. You can make tea, which goes for 24 hours, and you add other things like molasses as a food stock or kelp and other things. And you can get really creative with all the different stuff you add. But you have to be careful with that, because if you add too much stuff, you let it sit for too long, you're going to lose some of your diversity that you would have that you started with. So extracts are easier. They're a great place to start with. You can put them foliar on your garden. You can put it at the base of your plants. Trees absolutely love compost extract. And I found that out by trial. And actually, this one time, no error. We had made too much extract. I overflowed a trailer. And so I'm like, well, I'll dump some off in 5-gallon buckets, and I'll just go dump them on my mom's trees. She had 5 blue spruce trees that looked absolutely haggard. And I'm like, well, if nothing else, they're getting 5 gallons of water. They hadn't been setting pine cones or new growth for about 5 years. They were just stagnant. They were probably about 30 years old at that point, because I think I was driving a little Power Wheels Jeep when we planted them, because I continually ran over them. But anyway, so we started putting extract on them, and they started setting cones almost immediately, and started putting out new candle growth. And my business partner put some on lilac bushes that he'd brought home from the greenhouse, left in the containers from the greenhouse. We put a gallon of water on one and a gallon of extract on the other. And in 3 weeks, we had 8 extra inches of growth on that lilac bush versus the original. So, I mean, it's instantaneous, and extract's pretty hard to screw up. So it's a safe, easy way. Watch out for molasses. You can kill your plants with straight molasses. It takes a lot, but like if you put extract plus half a gallon of molasses on one plant, it will kill it. And then your wife is really mad. My business partner knows this. I don't. But he told me, so I didn't make my wife mad. And then the last one, I think close to the last one I'm going to talk about, is a worm wedge. So it kind of takes what our previous presenter was talking about and expands it to a large scale. So this is at the Arizona Worm Farm down in Phoenix. They have a 10-acre worm farm. They do most of that 10 acres. They have those long turned piles of compost. Once that cools off, they feed it to their worms. So they come in here and whoops, wrong button. They'll start over here against a piece of plywood, and they just make a little slope of compost, and they add their worms to the front of it. And then they're always adding to the front. And then after about 8 weeks of adding food to the front of that wedge, the worms are just going to chase that food across. So now you're not going to have any food or any worms on the backside. So you can start harvesting on the backside of it as you're feeding across. And then they stop when they get to about here. They'll put up another piece of plywood, and they'll remove this one over here. And then they will let it angle off, to a right angle here. And then they'll start going back the other way. So once they're harvesting, they get to the end and they start hitting worms as they harvest. They stop harvesting on that wedge, start building it the other way. After a few weeks, they'll take the plywood that was here off, and they'll harvest going the other way. And you just go back and forth and back and forth, and you have a continuous pile. It's a lot more forgiving on moisture and temperature swings than the CFTs that I have. I didn't do this on my concrete in my buildings because I was a little worried about eventually breaking down the concrete in the buildings. That's why I did the CFTs. But this is if you've got a warm place to do it and you've got some sheets of plywood, you are set up to go. You don't need any other materials, because the composters I have here, to buy one of those brand new is $8,000. So you don't want to start with that size. But this is a great way to learn. Captain Matt has a channel on Facebook. He does a lot of this worm feeding. He does it inside a plywood box. There's just all different kinds of ways to skin this cat. But yeah, you can find lots of people who do this. I think Arizona Worm Farm has a couple videos on how they do it. But you can learn lots about composting online. It's where I've learned most of it. I've read a few books, but most of it's been online. But you need to pick the style that fits your context and that sparks joy with you. Because if you do not like it, you're going to do a terrible job at it. You're not going to want to go look at it. You're not going to want to take the time to do it right. You're going to kind of do it halfway, and it's not going to turn out well. You get out of these what you put into them. So find something that interests you, that it fits your needs, your space, and your equipment. And doesn't take a lot of startup cost, because that's, until you figure it out, it hurts a lot less when you screw it up if you don't have a large investment in it. I've been on the other side of that several times. But that's kind of my ending things there. Oh, and then common signs that your compost pile has gone bad. That's the one that gassed my whole building out. That's like I don't know, 6,000 pounds there that all went bad and we had to scoop out. But if it smells, you've got something wrong. It's more than likely too wet. So you just need to take your pile apart, add some browns back to it. That'll dry it out a little bit, rebuild it. If it's not heating up, you probably don't have enough nitrogen source. Do not spray nitrogen on it. Some people will tell you to do that. It kind of defeats the whole purpose, because you're going to add salts to this and it's going to kill off the microbes. It's going to heat up, but not in the way that you want. So just break it down, add some more nitrogen sources to it, some more manure, more alfalfa, wet it back down, pile it back up. If it's overheating, turn it. Maybe add some browns to it when you turn it. Wet browns, that will slow your pile down a little bit. If it's too wet, like I said, add browns to it. It's probably going to stink if it's too wet. Too dry, that one's pretty easy. Just add water, restack it. But there's my contact information. You can call me, email me anytime. I love talking about compost. And if I don't know the answer, I generally know several other people who do, and I can point you in the right direction. But oh, and this is the first worm I found on my farm. I was digging up oats. It was right after we just applied worm extract to our ground for the first time. I had never found worms on our farm prior to that. After years and years of farming with my dad when I was little, digging in the dirt, never found any worms whatsoever. So that is my favorite picture right after my wife and kids. I have to say that because she's in the room. But yeah, and now every time I stick a shovel in the ground out in western Kansas, I find a worm on my dryland ground, which I don't know that there's many other people out there that can say that. And so pretty proud of that picture. But take any kind of questions you guys have, or I'll be around for the rest of the day if you have any and you don't want to ask in front of people too.